Well, good morning. My name's Rachel. I'm from Calgary. My colleague Shogi is in the back. He's here with me as well. Our team is made up of people from Alberta Health Services and the University of Calgary. So as I prepared for this presentation, we were told that it was supposed to be really good and really engaging. So I did what any sensible person would do. I went and scoured countless TED Talks, hoping to steal all the great hooks, ideas, tricks, and then come up here and sell them off like they were my own. What I found through that informal research is that all the best presentations start with stories. And this in and of itself is pretty interesting. You would have think that after having researched storytelling for the past 2 years, I would have figured that one out. Every piece of research we read solidified the power of stories to connect with people. So it would appear that all the evidence and all the great presenters were telling me to start with a story here today. Even Liz told me yesterday, I hope you're going to tell a story. But then I had this turmoil of what story to tell. Should I tell my favorite story about the motivational story about the lion? Or maybe I should tell you a story about a patient who I've worked with to courageously tell their healthcare story. Or maybe I should tell you the story about Alberta Health Services and its over 100,000 staff and 9,000 plus physicians who have a new mandate to put patients first. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it doesn't really matter what story I tell you. What matters is how you, the audience, receive it. This is, after all, the most profound finding of our research. My storytelling ability and the content of the story that I tell are important, but they're not as important as how it's received by the listener. We found that the context and the audience of the story was fundamental to a story's impact. So we get asked all the time, should stories be truth or fiction? Well, it depends on your audience. Should stories span a period of time, or does an anecdote work just the same? Well, depends on your audience. Should stories be in person, or does digital storytelling or other creative means work just the same? Again, it depends on your audience. What's so fascinating about this is that the reason why some stories work and others fall flat is that human beings have what we call storied minds. We make sense of our world and the complexity in it through stories. We make emotional connections through stories, and stories become our lens, our filter, and our bias, our way of seeing the world. And if you tell me a story that challenges or contradicts my current story about the world, I may choose to dismiss it entirely. Which brings a story to mind. The 9/11 Commission report noted that in the weeks prior to the attacks on the World Trade Center, a report titled "Terrorists Learn to Fly" was placed on the desks of CIA officials. At the time, it was deemed not to be worthy of further attention. This crucial information simply did not fit within the CIA's concept about how terrorism was happening at the time. This, to me, is a sobering example of how our own storied minds can be a major limitation if we're not aware of them. I wonder how many of us dismiss new information, stories, or ideas, even here in this room today, because they don't fit within our current story about the way that the world works. Our goal in Alberta Health Services is to support patients and families to tell their stories and to help the organizational culture move to more humanistic and compassionate outcomes. Our assumption has been that the stories will connect and resonate and help create this change, and indeed, many have. But how do we know? How can we support those in the audience who may feel threatened or challenged by these stories? The overworked, stressed out nurse who scoffs off a patient's story is a 1 in a million example. A doctor who would love to try out a new practice that supports her to spend more time with her patients, but knows that the leadership and the system will never support it. In these examples, we see that we can't assume that a patient's story has hit the bullseye, but rather we need to work to gather the stories that result inside the listener's mind and then support them to make sense of it afterwards. In short, we need to start to develop strategies to help what we call story listening. How many of us have shared a story as part of our work, but failed to assess how the audience actually understood or made sense of it? Guilty. I'll leave you with one of my favorite storytellers, John Steinbeck, who so beautifully shares wisdom in line with our research from his incredible novel, The Winter of Our Discontent. A story has as many versions as it has readers. Everyone takes what he wants or can from it, and thus is changed to its measure. Some pick out the parts and reject the rest. Some strain the story through the mesh of prejudice, and some paint it with their own delight. Thank you.